So it's week 8. Just before we start into today's lesson, I kind of want to look at where we're going, what's going on the next few weeks. So what we're going to do today, we're going to resume where we left off before our midterm with our little Contoso University application. Before the break, we did reading data and creating data. We did our class sample, and then for lab 2, you did that with the students table in the database. We worked with the departments table in the database. We don't have delete and update functionality, so that's what we're going to do today. So our plan for today is we're going to together add update and delete functionality on our departments pages, and then you're going to have lab 3, which will be due Wednesday night, where you're going to add the update and the delete features to the student pages. Okay? And if you don't have those pages complete because either you didn't do lab 2 or you didn't complete it, those pages are on Blackboard, so you can take them and put them in your solution. Next week, we're going to tackle authentication and security. I am probably not here next week, so Ross, who's coordinator for computer programmers, so many of you know Ross. I think Ross is going to be here and he's going to fill in for me. And we're basically going to go through. There's a kind of a library or a plugin that we can add into our ASP.NET application that handles most authentication and security features. So we actually don't have to write a lot of code. We have to add this module and then kind of understand how it works. And it will do things like registration, login, hashing of passwords, roles and permissions. All these things are kind of built into this module. So Ross, in all likelihood, will be here next week, and he's going to go through that with you guys. Okay. Now there's a chance that will probably only take one class, and then at this point we're going to kind of evaluate. My plan would hopefully be at that point we sort of have a full web forms application running where we're doing create, read, update, delete. We have authentication. That would give us a chance to spend a few weeks with ASP.NET MVC. Now the other option is we may add a few additional features onto our current Contoso application for the next in weeks 10 and 11, which would mean we would touch on ASP.NET kind of a little more superficially. So we'll kind of make that decision in a couple weeks. We'll see how the next few weeks go. Okay. And then your assignment 2 is actually going to be due, so I'll be giving you that out not for a few weeks, and it's going to be due in 3 parts. You're going to have to submit a part of it every week. And part of the reason for this, I've had some discussions with some of the other teachers. We've dealt with a lot of plagiarism this semester. I think record numbers of getting duplicate assignments, or in some cases, I got 4 assignments that were identical from 4 different students. So part of our concern is people are leaving the assignments too long. They leave them till the end, and by then it's too late to get help. They panic, so they take a friend's assignment and submit it. So part of the challenge we're assuming has to do with time management, which is why I'm going to make you do assignment 2 in 3 parts, and you're going to have to submit every week. So that way you're going to be forced to work on the assignment. You can't leave it all till the last minute, which will hopefully reduce the temptation to take somebody else's work and submit it. Okay. So that's kind of our plan for the next few weeks. So let's get back into our solution. If you do not have a working copy of our solution from lesson 6, you can grab it off of GitHub. There's my week 6 solution. So I'm just going to see what the easiest thing is. I'm actually just going to copy my week 6 folder. And I'll rename it to week 8. And I'll open up the solution. It says week 6. That's okay. Again, if you don't have the code, you can grab it off of GitHub. So I'll rename my solution to week 8. And I'll rename my project to week 8. And I'll just get it running. So I'll start without debugging to start my IIS Express. So I have the departments and department details pages that we did in class. I also have the students and student detail pages that I asked you to do for your lab. So if you did lab 2, you'll have these files, student and student details. So our application looked something like this. When I clicked on departments, we're using the entity framework, and yeah, I have a whole lot of duplicates here in my database, which is okay. And I could add in a new department. So this is where we left off before, I guess 3 weeks ago now, before reading week and before our midterm exam. By the way, Rob, question? Should be right here. It's public. So the full URL, github.com/ifotn/COMP2084-week6. Anybody else having trouble finding the repository? Or can you see it? You grabbed it? You see it, Rob? Okay. So we kind of left off here. So my application is pointing to my Azure database, which is fine. It doesn't really matter if we're sharing the same database. If you have your own running on Azure, that's better. That's ideal. If you haven't been able to connect, well, we may need to chat at the end of class. So I'll just kind of pause for a minute or two, make sure everybody has a copy of, has a working solution running that we can work with for today. Just want to have a quick look at the update of who can create a database. Okay, so about 2/3 can create a database and 1/3 of you can't. Now, unfortunately, if you're one of the students who can't create a database on Azure, here's what we need to do. We basically need to contact Microsoft to send them an email and ask them to modify your subscription. Here would be the place to go to do that. Because you will need a database for assignment 2. You will need to have access to a database. So on the imagine.microsoft.com website, let's see where it would be the best place to go. And we probably don't want to go through here. Let's see if we sign in here. Just looking if there is a support link specifically for Imagine. I'm hoping that there is. Let's try. Okay, well, I'm going to have to find where we need to go to contact Microsoft. So basically what we need to tell them is you're a Georgian College Computer Studies student, you have an Azure account, but you have no access to create an SQL database, that it's not recognizing your Imagine subscription. If you have a recognized Azure or DreamSpark subscription, you have access to create databases. Okay, so what we want to do, the first thing we want to do today, now that I've got my solution running, is we want to add the ability to delete. So we want to add a delete column to our ASP Gridview on the departments page. We'll also want to add a little JavaScript confirmation using jQuery, make sure the user doesn't delete something by accident. And then we'll want to write code on the page that will remove the department that was picked and refresh the page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up in our HTML view, we want to open up the departments.aspx page. So here was the grid that we wrote. We had 3 bound fields for the 3 columns in our table. So we want a 4th column in here. We're not going to use an ASP bound field, so we're going to use something different. We're going to use an ASP command field. We'll see what this generates. We'll set the header text, say delete. And if we look in the properties, there's a property here that says show delete button. So I'll pick show delete button and we'll set that property equal to true. So this property is built into our ASP grid view. It assumes anytime we have a grid of data that we might want to be able to delete a row from the grid. So we have this feature that comes as part of our grid. If I just reload the page, we now get delete links. Change the format if we want those to be buttons instead of links, no problem, we can do that. I'm just going to leave them as links. They won't do anything right now. But notice my status bar at the bottom left. So what is going to get triggered when I click delete? We haven't written any code. All we've done is put the HTML on. But what can you see from the status bar? What's it going to do?
JavaScript.
Yeah, it's going to use JavaScript. And you can see the name of the function it runs. It says do postback. So it's actually going to do a form submission. The page is going to reload. And also notice, watch as I move from one link to the other. It mostly calls the same function except for one thing. What's different? What changes in the status bar? Okay, you're very close. Look very carefully. Is it the ID? Yeah, it's the index in the grid. So for example, English is department ID 1, but when I mouse over the link, it says delete $0. So delete the first row of the grid. So it's not necessarily a match for the ID number, right? If our ID started at 400, we'd have 400, 401, yet these indices would still go from 0 up till the number, okay? So this is what that index does is when our page reloads, we can use that index to identify which row the user clicked, okay? But we are, Rob, we are going to want to tie it to the ID, right? Because we need to know the ID in order to actually access that record in the database.
That's a question. In case I have a new column, but I don't have links.
So it just says delete, but they're not links?
Yes, delete. I'm in the header of the column, but I don't have actually links.
Okay, did you set this property, show delete button equals true? So that's why you have no delete button. So there's other things we could put in there. There's an edit button, insert, select. These are automatically built right into the grid. Now we need to do one other thing on our grid tag. We want to set one other property, which is we want to set a key field. So just like in our database table, we have a primary key that uniquely identifies the records. In our grid, we can actually do the same. So up in my grid view on line 8 and 9, after I have this auto-generate columns, I'm going to set this property, data key names. I can actually set multiple keys if I want. Typically, we'll just use the ID column. In this case is department ID. So we're matching from our departments table. We're taking the primary key column in that table, and we're telling our grid to use that field basically like a primary key. So we can uniquely identify every record in the grid based on department ID. So this is pretty much all the HTML we're going to need. We will need to add a class to it so that we can attach a JavaScript, a jQuery confirmation pop-up. We'll do that after. We'll get the delete working. Once it works, we'll add our confirmation. And then I can start deleting my many, many duplicate departments in my database. So now what we need to do is we need to attach a C# event on the server that will connect to SQL Server and delete a department, and we need to attach that event to our grid. If we think about on our department details page for a minute that we did, right? This is how we attached our button to the C# code that it executes. So we created this form. And once we laid out the HTML, I just went into the design view and I double clicked the button, and Visual Studio generated this click method. And that's where we put our C# code to do our save operation. So we need to do kind of a similar thing now on our grid view. We have the HTML grid view. We wanted to execute C# code, so we need to tie those together. So inside of my grid view tag, I type on row, here are all the built-in events that can happen with a grid view. So anybody want to take a wild guess which event we're going to use to tie this HTML to our C# code? You can see it in the list. You're close. It's on row deleting. So what's the difference between the two? We have these two. On row deleting is what do we do before data gets deleted? On row deleted is what if we wanted to have something happen after a row is deleted. But a very reasonable guess. So I'm going to choose on row deleting. And then I hit the equal sign. And Visual Studio will prompt me. It'll say, do you want to create a new event here? Well, yes, we do, because we have no code to handle a delete event. So I'll just double click this, just select it and hit enter or double click. Now we can just type all this code. However, when I use the little pop-up, Visual Studio will write a row deleting function for me. If we go back, notice, I don't know if I've pointed this out before, any files that have unsaved changes, Visual Studio puts a little star beside them. So as soon as I change the code here, I now have an unsaved change in my C# code. So it modified the department.aspx.cs. When I click here, Visual Studio, just like clicking the button, it wrote a click method. Well, by picking that little create new event menu, it generates this row deleting. So we could type all the code if we want, but that's much easier to just use our mouse and click and have Visual Studio auto-generate the function we need. So this is our function, delete a department from the grid view. So again, this attribute, this is what ties the HTML grid to the C# code in behind when we want to delete something. I'll take that out and just do it one more time, because I know you haven't seen it before and maybe somebody missed it. In my grid, I type on row, I choose on row deleting. And I hit the equal sign, and I just double click this little event. It will automatically name the event grid departments underscore row deleting. And generates our function for us. So we're going to have to do a few things here. The first thing we're going to need to do is figure out which row in the grid the user clicked on. And that's what this little number will tell us. Right? As Asim said, this number is an array starting at 0. So if the user clicks the first row, we're going to have a value of 0. We're going to be able to identify that they clicked row 0. So step 1 will be row will be row 0, etc. The second thing will be to find the department ID value in the selected row. So again, if we click the first row, which is index 0, we then need to identify this record in the grid and find the ID value, because that's the value we're going to need in order to tell the database what to remove. So that'll be step 2. We'll connect to our database the same way we did last week. We used the entity framework. It created this series of models in this diagram and a connection string, which is in our web.config file that points to our Azure database. Or maybe you have it pointing to a local database if you're running SQL Server locally. Then we'll want to delete the department. And then we'll want to run our query again to repopulate the grid. So whatever record we've deleted is gone from the page, gone from the database and off of our page. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to know, we need to identify that little number that's on the end of the link, starting at 0. So we'll create an integer variable. I'll just call it grid index. So that'll tell us which row in the grid the user clicked on. So how do we get it? We haven't really talked much about this stuff yet. Notice when Visual Studio generated our row deleting, we haven't really talked about what these things are. It automatically has these 2 parameters. One is the sender. So that just means which object on the page called this method. In this case, our object is our grid. The second thing is Gridview delete event arguments. That's represented by this little parameter E. Anybody have any idea what this value means? Where it comes from? Rob?
It's basically short form for a variable firing from the event. That you click on the button and it puts together an object package. It knows itself. It's all the parameters being sent to you by that event.
Okay. That's exactly right. So if this event has any information, arguments, or parameters coming in, they're represented by that E variable. Well, when I mouse over the links and you look at the status bar, what parameter value do you see being passed in to the event? And each one is different. Asim, I'll ask you because you already answered the question.
Sorry.
So if I mouse over the links, we can actually visually see in the status bar, there is a parameter, there is a value being passed in to this method. What are we passing in? Yeah, the row index, the array of the grid. So that our E will tell us, will let us access what that number is. So if I type E and a dot, here's what Visual Studio, here are the options for the different properties of our event argument. So which one do you think, which property do we want to pick from this little list? Right, the row index. Rob?
Not to be that guy, but isn't that insanely dangerous, trusting the user to not falsify the input under anything like that? But your query could change between when they click that delete button, so they could just spoof an index number, and suddenly you're losing data for no reason.
I'm thinking about that. It's a very good question.
Because you're giving them the JavaScript right there, so they could just run their own JavaScript to say, instead of delete index 32, delete 64, and suddenly you just lost a whole department.
I think they use cross-site scripting token to prevent scripting. So.
I think so too. So it generates, this generates a whole bunch of JavaScript.
You should try.
But yeah, it should prevent cross-site scripting. Tom?
It's not really an issue because the user has access to delete 64, 172, like they can delete whatever they want. The only issue is if someone did cross-site stuff, that's why it could be.
Yeah, I mean, right now I could delete them all. I just have to click each one and I can delete them all. Right? Now, the other thing we can do is if we want it so that, for example, you can only delete data that's available to you, we can also encrypt the index. We can add some encryption on so somebody couldn't read them. That'd be another option. So this should tell us what row the user clicked. Now I'm just going to run this with my debugger on for a minute just so we can verify that it actually will show us the right value. So if I start my debugger, with a breakpoint on this line, we can see what happens. But it's always slow to start the debugger. So if I click row 0, says row index is 0, and now my grid index variable is also 0. So that's right, got the right number. We'll just continue and try another one. If I click row, so this is row 14, my status bar tells me. If I click this one, so when my row index is 14, my grid index is 14. Okay, so this will accurately tell us which row the user clicked. So that's just a start. That's not enough to go to the database, but at least we know which row they clicked. So that's part 1. So now we need to use this value. We need to use that row. And we also need to use, that's why we had to add this part. We now need to identify the data key called department ID for the selected row. So that will give us the actual primary key value we can use. So let's create another variable, an integer variable called department ID. So we're going to get the value. We're going to go to our grid and find the key value called department ID in the row the user clicked on. There's kind of a lot of things going on there.
What's the difference between value and values? I noticed that value is an option too.
Good question. Let's look. Okay, we could use either one. So what it says, so values, in fact, it might be shorter to use value. When I do it this way, it's a collection. so we can have multiple keys. So we have to specify that it's the department ID. I think we can do it this way. If I take out the S and mouse over, Visual Studio says it gets the value of the key field at index 0. So we could probably do that. So the first key value. So we can actually try it this way, make it a little shorter. Now, why am I getting this error? So again, go to our grid, find the key value in the row the user clicked on. That should give us the corresponding department ID. Rob?
It's an object. I need to cast it to a bit.
Right, so this doesn't have any data type. It says cannot convert object, doesn't have any particular data type. We need to identify a department ID as an integer. So we're going to need to convert this to an integer. So we'll call convert. And we'll wrap that expression in brackets. We'll run this with the debugger again and see whether we get a correct department ID. So if I click on the first row, hopefully our department ID is going to be 1. And we'll try clicking on another row farther down in the grid. So when I click the first one, my index is 0. So my grid index is 0, and my department ID says 1. It's good. If I click further down, let's say I click row 12, status bar says this is row 12. So if grid index is 12, department ID in this case is 13. So it's giving us the values we want. Once we have that ID, then we can connect to our database and just do a delete. So here's the good and the bad. The good is Visual Studio makes it easy for us to generate the delete. All we have to do to generate the delete button is add a column with show delete button true and add the event handler. It writes that code function, it writes our delete function for us. So it automates some of the work. The tricky part is really just this one line, because we're doing many different things here.
Why you have to convert to integer? What's the data type you receive?
Okay, well, let me take it out. The first, so Visual Studio, we can already tell it doesn't like what we're doing, right? It's red. If I try to compile my code now, it's going to give us an error. So the error says it cannot convert an object to an integer. Our variable is expecting a number. But this, when we set a key field, Visual Studio doesn't know what type of data that could be. We could set key field on a string or a date or any type. So if we want to store this value into a variable of an integer, we have to convert it to a number first. Okay. In effect, this is when it says cannot convert object, object basically means an undefined type. So it doesn't know. When you see object, it means some kind of data that has no defined data type.
So in case it would be not what the default any string, we would have no.
Yes, that's right. So let's say we wanted the department name in a string variable, then you'd need this .toString. So whenever we get this value, and you can actually see right here, notice right at the beginning, it says object. See in that little pop-up, object. So that value property returns an object with no data type. So we specifically have to convert it into whatever type of data it should be. okay? Because we could set that key field on anything. But we do need to do the conversion. So now we're going to do something similar to what we did, well, I guess what we did here when we saved a new department. We'll connect to the database. We'll create a new instance of a department. We're not going to need to fill the name and budget. What property of the department will we need to fill when the user clicks delete? What information is the database going to need? Right, we'll have to populate the ID number from our department ID variable. And then when we saved, here was the code, departments.add and connection.save changes. What code do you suppose we're going to need once we give it an ID? Right, we're going to call .remove and .save changes. So we don't have to write any SQL. We're going to use the entity framework. It automatically has a remove method we can execute. So we'll create a connection. So there's our nice simple connection line. So Contoso entities is defined in our web.config file. We used the wizard to connect to our database with the entity framework a few weeks ago. And when we did that, somewhere in the wizard, it said, do you want to save the connection string to web.config? And we checked the box that said yes. So in web.config, in the connection string section, it added this line that says the name is Contoso entities, and here was our long, complicated connection string. That includes our link to our Azure database. So we used the wizard to auto-generate that for us. So now we're just using that connection string. So we're going to create a new department. And again, the entity framework, it defined what a department is for us. We didn't have to build this class. Entity framework did it for us based on this diagram that it generated, right? This is what a department is. It's basically an exact replica of the department table in our database. So we want to fill the department ID property. What value here holds the correct department ID? How do we finish this line? So, good guess. It's not the grid index, because the grid index won't be the ID, right? The grid index will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But we do have the department ID somewhere else. Rob?
Is the primary key value from your variable you cast from the object.
Right. Our department ID is on the next line. So first we got the grid index, and then we used it to get the department ID value. So now we want to set it in here. So we're kind of moving along. First we figure out what row the user clicked. Then we get the department ID value in that row. Then we take that value and pass it into this new department object in memory. And then we take our connection and our department, and we call remove. And we pass in this department object we're creating in memory. So I know it seems strange. We have to create a department in memory in order to destroy it. And then we always, whenever we do any database operation, we have to execute the save changes method. So this runs a delete on our database, and it deletes the department with this ID. So this would be the equivalent, if we were writing this in SQL, of a command delete from departments where department ID equals some primary key value. So this should remove the department. And then we just want to call our get function, get departments function, because this requeries the database and repopulates our grid. This should be everything we need to do, but we'll try it out and then we'll take a break. We'll leave the confirmation part off. For now, we can add that little jQuery pop-up after the break once our delete's running. So let's give this a try. I may have to restart my server. Okay, now one quick tip. Don't try this with the first 4 courses because there is related data. If I try this on mathematics, for example, in the database, there are students enrolled in mathematics in the sample database I gave you. So it's going to throw an error saying you can't delete it because there are students enrolled in that, or sorry, there are courses in that department. So you can't delete a department that has related courses. So if I try it now, I should get an error. Or then again, maybe not. I'll try and delete one down at the bottom. Okay. Oh, we may need to change this around just a little bit. This is again where our debugger is helpful. I'm not getting the result I want. So I'll try it with the debugger and we can watch what's happening. I think we're going to have to make a little change down on line 50. I'll try. Okay, so I have department ID 35. That's good. I have my connection. That's good. We have a department. We're trying to remove. Oh, okay. Well, there's our error, which we didn't see. Object cannot be deleted because it was not found.
So what you got now, you pass it to that delete.
Okay, so, well, that was the easier attempt. Okay, we'll have to make a quick change. Rather than getting the ID this way, we'll have to do it this way. Instead of just creating a new department like this, I think what we have to do is actually query the database for this particular department, get it in memory, and then delete it. Which doesn't seem terribly efficient, and it's not, to have to run a query first to get this object, just in order to delete it. But based on the error message, that's what we're gonna have to do. So here's how we run a query and we run a query up here to get all departments. We're gonna have to run a similar query to get a single department. We're running a query on our departments, but we're passing in a where clause. We don't want all the departments, we just want one. Oh, whoops. I think this will fix our error. So we're going to pass the department ID. We're going to create our object by querying the database first, and then we pass that object back to the database to be removed. And I just need two separate variables. So one inside my query language and another variable representing the same thing outside. Devin?
Can we just mouse over your department name variable? What value did it got you the correct value?
It did give me the correct value, yes. So yours is 0?
Yes.
With the debugger, like, so you have the debugger running?
Yeah.
Okay, hit F11 to go to the next line and then mouse over it. Still 0?
No.
Yeah, because it's after you don't see the value until that line completes. When the line's highlighted, it hasn't executed yet. You hit F11 to go to the next line. Okay. So we'll try one more time. Okay, so now when I delete, my grid reloads and my web design is gone. If I try and delete one of the first 4, I'm probably going to get an error saying it can't delete because there's related child data. I'll try it. When I delete mathematics, yeah, I have a key constraint in courses because there are courses in the course table that have a foreign key of my department ID. So it's not going to allow me to delete a department when there are courses in a related table.
Actually, I found something online that we don't have current database.
Okay, I'm not happy with that solution. So if you've got a better one, great.
Yeah, we can use like connections.departments.attach and pass that object as a parameter, and then use the departments.remote.dsf not the function that attach the object.
Okay. So,
We need to create an object.
okay, so back to the way I'm going to put it back the way I had it before. So this is option 1. You had those and then you called attach. So connection dot apartments. Okay, so the way I had it would work. I just didn't call it the attach function. That seems a lot more efficient. We'll try that out as well. So 2 different ways of doing the same thing. I like your solution better than my solution. Thank you. And you tried it and it runs? Okay. Seems strange to attach something in order to delete it, but if that's what it's going to make us do. So I'll try and delete one of these musics. I have 3 of them right now. Okay, yep, that seems to work fine. Thank you for that. I think that's a much cleaner solution. So fill the ID from the row index, attach it to the connection, and then remove it and call save. Okay, sorry, we went on a bit long there. I'm going to pause my stream. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I'll leave the code up for anybody who needs to see it. When we come back, we're going to add a JavaScript confirmation to this.